Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute broadcasting this morning. Well, actually, it's midday here in Toronto, but for most of our panelists, they're all on the West Coast. So they're just getting going, having their cups of coffee, mid-morning tea, potentially, perhaps. These broadcasts originate in Toronto, but they're broadcast across the country and into North America and in Europe. And we are very appreciative of people that are dialing in from other places. We think it's so important that we learn from each other, that we get a chance to take a moment to really make sense of what the impacts of COVID are on all of us and on our communities. So we appreciate people taking the time out of their day to be with us, and our guests who are going to help us learn more and understand more about the impact that COVID is having on people who are homeless and people that are living who are unhoused, who are not living in the right kinds of, or the safest kinds of environments that we would all hope that they would. This is part of something called the Right to Home Week. Some of you will have joined us yesterday. There are sessions tomorrow and Thursday as well, all focusing on whether or not the right to housing is a way for us to be able to have better outcomes and really address the fundamental systemic challenges we seem to have here in Canada, but not just in Canada, around the provision of homes and housing. These broadcasts originated in terms of where CUI is headquartered, is in Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's home now to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis from across Turtle Island. Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13, which was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties that were signed with multiple Anishinaabeg nations. And we have these conversations, and I think we're into maybe the 53rd or 54th that we've been doing, so several a week. We have these conversations in the context that we are settlers, predominantly, most of us, and that we are in territories that were held and have been held by Indigenous people for years and years and years prior to our arrival. And how do we come to terms with that legacy, and how do we actually make the kinds of changes in terms of how we build cities, plan cities, govern cities, finance cities? Similarly, through COVID, we've become aware of all the other dysfunctions that exist in city life. We perhaps were aware of them before, but now they are much magnified or exacerbated by the conditions of COVID, and that includes homelessness, but it also includes racism and systemic bias and all the things that continue to compromise our ability to make communities for everyone. So we have these conversations trying to navigate our way through that and figure out how do we build back better, and how do we emerge from this pandemic, however long it takes. How do we emerge with systems that are better and serve people more appropriately and better? So joining us today, as I suggested, are folks in sunny Victoria. I actually think I can see sunshine behind the Victoria crew. And Stephanie's in Vancouver, and Tim is in Kelowna. You're all in BC. So you're all having your morning coffee this morning with us. And as I mentioned yesterday, we have a big crew of sponsors helping to make these conversations this week all the more valuable. And I think that what it underscores to me, there's a long list of them, and maybe what I'll do is I'll read them at the end today rather than at the beginning. But what it underscores to me is that it takes a lot of people, a lot of institutional change, a lot of momentum to try to actually solve this. It's not one individual's struggle. It's not one organization's struggle. It's not one level of government. It's really an all hands on deck moment in terms of how we understand the crisis that we're facing around homelessness. So I'm going to start with the gang in Victoria because there's three of them, and I'm told that this is their first time together doing something like this. So that's great. We're glad you're making your debut here on City Talk. Part of Right to Home Week is having 2 films that are available for continual screening, and I really hope that people in the chat have taken advantage of this. And if you haven't, that's what you need to do tonight, is take a moment and see if you can watch both of these films. They're available for you to watch them for free, which is tremendous. Thank you to the producers of both films. Bush, which features Leilani Farha and is all about the financialization of housing, and then Us and Them. And the director, and I think producer of Us and Them, is with us, Krista, and 2 of the stars of Us and Them, although I don't think they'd want to call themselves probably stars, but Krista and Karen Eddie and Karen are with us, and actually all 3 of you are in the film, but Eddie and Karen and their stories, they tell their stories on that film. So I'm going to turn to you first in Victoria. Krista, why don't you just give us a bit of a sense of your experience in Victoria, and then I'd like to talk to Eddie and Karen about their particular experience and how COVID has affected them and affecting their friends and and their
Okay.
communities.
Did we want to do a land acknowledgement?
Yeah.
So we're gathered on the land of the Lekwungen people who have walked for thousands of years here, and they've shared the lands with the Esquimalt Nation. And I feel I must honor the gift of being allowed to share the medicine of these lands by raising my hands to them. My friend Eddie Charlie wrote those words for me to share today. When I asked him how he feels when he hears a non-Indigenous person doing a land acknowledgement, he says, "I cry," because I don't think that I don't think people who are making an effort to acknowledge the history of the land know that they have benefited from our hurt since first contact and continue to do so today. A third of the homeless people on these lands identify as Indigenous, yet Indigenous people make up less than 5% of the general population here. So to understand why this disproportionate number exists, I want to add something proactive to this land acknowledgement and invite people to read the definition of Indigenous homelessness in Canada. It's on the homelesshub.ca, and I can put it in the comments. We raise our hands to you, Eddie, and to all the survivors of settler colonization. So we have seen a lot of activity here in Victoria around some of the things that I would call pretty progressive ways to deal with homelessness. One is straight up housing people. We housed probably about 450 people from the beginning of COVID. 344 of those were housed in less than a month in hotels here. And safe supply was also introduced, which is something that I thought was light years away. So COVID has pushed things, but it's not without problems, and it's not without difficulties. And there's still, it's hard to actually say, but probably, don't quote me, but 300 to 400 people who are still left outside in Victoria who didn't get housing. So I think that's what we're really focused on here in Victoria is how do we get everyone inside, and how do we, create the affordable housing that's required. And in addition to that, start treating drug addiction as a healthcare issue and something that needs to be looked at like addiction medicine. So that's where we are with it here in Victoria in terms of COVID.
We work quite a lot with your mayor, with Mayor Helps, who's really becoming a national leader on this. And knowing her, she's probably on the broadcast listening in, and she's, I know, experiencing some opposition in Victoria, not just from locals, but also I see the Premier actually is objecting to some of the things that she's decided to do in terms of how Beacon Hill is being used in camps. I want to talk to Eddie. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's very irresponsible of our Premier to say things like that at a time like this. The community is already so polarized, and for him to come out and say that there's a 7-to-7 bylaw here where people who are camping in parks need to pack up their tents, and Bonnie Henry has, and also the BC Centre for Disease Control and the US Centre for Disease Control says that people need to shelter in place, and the Premier is going directly against that and calling out Victoria's leadership. And it's like, why do that right now? It's already so volatile.
Yeah, well, and as you say, I guess that's it. It's volatile. And I'm sure that Tim and Stephanie will have views on this too, because Tim particularly is involved in this issue across the country, and Stephanie is working for BC Housing. So I'll ask them in a second to comment. But before I do go to that, I just want to talk to Eddie and Karen about living on the street. And because both of you have lived on the street and you've gone through that experience. So tell me, what would you imagine would be the challenges for you if you were still living on the street during COVID? And I'm sure you have friends that you're talking to. So Eddie, can you talk to us a little bit about what this last several months has felt like for you?
For myself, it's been all right because I found housing. But most of my friends are still on the streets, and so they're a little bit scattered around. Most of them have been housed in that, luckily. But still, there's a great problem, of people that are drug addicted, homeless and just have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So they're just, what do you do?
Yeah, this phrase that we were to shelter at home has ended up being not a good thing for all sorts of people. If you didn't have a home, or maybe you have an unsafe home, or maybe you have a home that's already too crowded. So it's been difficult. And Eddie, in terms of your friends, when you say they're sort of scattered, is that also a challenge, is that you actually don't know where everybody is?
Exactly. Yeah. So you see one person here, one person there, and you sort of, talk and learn, how they're doing. And so it's become a little bit, disenfranchised.
Yeah, because it's taking people from their place.
Yeah.
Yeah, their neighborhood. Yeah. I think this is one of, we're trying to figure out, are there lessons we need to learn? And it seems to me one of them is people have an attachment to a place, and you want housing to be near the place, not somewhere else in the middle of wherever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Karen, what was your, it's okay.
Okay, I was just falling asleep.
That's all right. I'll keep you awake. Don't worry. Tell us about your experience with this. How have you been coping with COVID?
I'm not too bad because I've been staying home since I heard that we have this COVID here.
Yeah.
I keep myself at home. Once in a while, I go out to get my pay and stuff like that. Go grocery shopping, get myself a little bingo tickets, and just go home and stay home.
Yep.
And sometimes I go to visit my friends downtown by our place. And I usually bring 2 at a time home to stay here with me, to keep me company.
That's good.
So I can keep them out of there for a while.
And
I'm trying to make them stay with me.
Uh-huh.
But they wouldn't. I think they'd rather be outside than being indoors. You know what I mean?
Well, that is another part of it, isn't it? Is that right now it's safer to be out. A lot of people believe it's safer to be outdoors than to be in a closed space.
You know why? Because I've been out there for 20 years.
Yeah.
I think I've been out there more than they have.
Yeah.
I started out in Fort McMurray, Alberta.
Uh-huh.
And 30 below outside. And so I think, in Victoria, it's kind of warm. We have a warm weather. They enjoy that, I think, because they like doing their dopes and drinking, which I do drink, but not all the time. And I used to enjoy that when I was outside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
These panhandle just to get my dope, and not my dope, my drinks and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But now, that's not it anymore. I'm myself now.
It's different now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought about everything what I used to do outside. So mostly people, all my friends, I usually talk to them when I take them home. Talking to them, it's okay with them. But when they're out there again, it's no use.
Yeah.
They go their own way.
Yeah.
They listen for about a couple of days. Then after they go back on the street, they forget about what you talk to them about.
Right.
So I don't really know.
Yeah. And these are challenges that existed before COVID. People were living off and on the street, and now COVID's just made it that much more difficult, I think. Yeah.
It is.
Right.
So hopefully, I just hope, like Krista said, I just hope that they get into a building somewhere. I'm pretty sure they'll take good care of it.
Right.
Some of them.
Well, let's talk to Stephanie about that, because Stephanie's in the business. She's at BC Housing, and I want to hear what her perspective is. She's been trying to build housing. Stephanie, I'm assuming you've been with BC Housing for a number of years, so you've got lots of experience you can share with us, and tell us how things have changed during COVID, and what have you been challenged by, and then let's talk further later on about what you think the possibilities might be. But can you tell us a little bit from your perspective? Is Karen right about that we just, there are more and more people that need units and we don't seem to have them? Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, really in a nutshell. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm talking to you today from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. As a descendant of enslaved people on this hemisphere, I really stand in strong solidarity under the experiences of colonization and really recognize how this is showing up in homelessness across our country. So it's, as we make these acknowledgements, it's really important, I think, at this time to reflect on what that means when we are understanding and talking about the crisis of homelessness and what the drivers are. Because as you mentioned at the beginning, Mary, so many of our systems that many of us who have been working on them for years knew were not meeting the needs of everyone became quite glaringly exposed, during the COVID pandemic. Whether it was the issues of city planning that have put certain people in certain areas without access to certain things, whether it's in that built-in deep segregation that we see in our cities, whether it's the child welfare system and youth in crisis, people experiencing violence in the home and not having resources and where to go. I mean, all of these things, as well as the policing aspect of people who are without housing, without access. So all of those things became quite glaringly into focus. And then we found in the local context that, of course, in the response to COVID, many services shut down. Many public amenities were closed. Places where people could normally go for food, could go for services, laundry, hygiene, those things were shuttered due to the response. We also saw guest policies change in supportive housing projects or places where people might be able to couch surf. They were no longer able to do that because of, the requirements to keep, residents safe. These things changed. And then we saw, of course, with the people not all being on safe supply, although safe supply has been a very important move during the pandemic and even before that, what people were doing to medicate their pain, which we know addictions to be, the supply was becoming more and more toxic. So this pre-existing, crisis of not really treating pain and pain management well for people who are struggling has really exacerbated, the issues that people were facing on without shelter. And so in our work with BC Housing, we were looking at getting into high gear on how we were supporting communities across the province, and being really cognizant of the ways that there are impacts to the existing services. So we had conversations across different municipalities and health authorities about opening up emergency spaces, because we know that homeless shelters, being what they are not also good places to isolate or be, shelter at home. So opening up spaces for people to be able to access a bit better spaces, spacing out people who were particularly vulnerable, right, to the virus, and who would, if they were to contact it would be devastating. So that was also another thing that we, had to kick into gear for. And of course, we had these larger encampments across the province of people who are, sheltering together. And our pre-work here in Vancouver of working with camp advocates and working with people in situation and peers was really about understanding how to do work that was trauma-informed and culturally informed. We were learning a lot directly from people impacted. Many of us are in the position of privilege, working with people who are homeless and trying to figure out, how to best serve. But I think centering voices is something we came to really understand the real gravity of and the importance of, is to hear from people what the solutions are that they need and to do our best to meet them. So that when we had the public safety order here in Vancouver, we had pre-existing relationships. We had already really done a lot of outreach work with people in the encampment here in Vancouver, and we're able to work with them in a real culturally informed way. We brought in daily communications. Another thing is people who are homeless don't necessarily have cell phone service or data, or are watching the news like we were all doing every day, catching the updates. So in order to communicate with people, we needed to find new ways and new channels, because unfortunately rumor mills happen, and those rumor mills can be sometimes erroneous, and people would be getting the wrong information. So communication was another major, thing that we had to start to pay attention to. So, we had also the benefit of getting funding to take on hotels, to put, folks in and to offer that accommodation, as well as some of our own directly managed stock and housing stock in the sector. And so those accommodations were actually very well received by people. We've heard very positive stories about people who have settled into hotels here in Vancouver because, we had that relationship going in, the communication. I mean, there's a lot of hesitation sometimes when people are being asked to move on. Distrust in the system is warranted. The system has failed so many people. And so being able to offer those accommodations and work with people to have them successfully transfer out of being outside and into hotels was another really important aspect of our response locally. But we know it's not enough because there still remains unsheltered people.
So Stephanie, can I pursue you on that a bit? Just give us the basics. How many units does BC Housing have?
In all of our stock, or
Yeah.
So in our directly managed stock in British Columbia, we have approximately just over 5,000 units. But in the not-for-profit sector, there's upwards of 60,000.
60,000. And of that, roughly, what percentage would be called termed supportive housing, where there are other supports?
That's a good question. I'm not sure of the exact count across the province. But I know that we have a number of those types of supportive housing, both permanently built as well as our temporary modular projects. And we've got a number on the way. But yes, we know that there's more folks in the homeless count than we currently have spaces. So we have a lot, of work that we're still doing.
And do you have any idea what the gap is?
That's a good question. So we did house in Vancouver close to 300 people, and as Krista mentioned, during the crisis, and then as Krista mentioned in Victoria, we housed as well upwards of over 400 people. So we had that big opportunity through this, unfortunate crisis that we were in, and we know that there's still a gap. The last homeless count in Vancouver between both people in shelter and unsheltered was around 2,000, and we know that since that homeless count, we have not necessarily created 2,000 permanent spaces. A great mandate, and we have been given a lot of resources, but we know that there's still way more resources necessary, particularly because there is a pipeline, unfortunately, of people going into homelessness because the upstream solutions are still not quite there. When we talk about, child welfare programs, when we talk about domestic violence, when we talk about, kids being kicked out of school, when we talk about racism and what people face as discrimination and exclusion from the economic and social aspects of our society. So there's still this pipeline, unfortunately, of people that emerge into homelessness who were, let's say, precarious pre-COVID, but the circumstances of losing jobs, losing abilities to stay where they were, facing other crises in the home has driven more people outside. Yeah,
it's more acute. Tim, don't panic. I haven't forgotten you're there, but I'm going to go back to Eddie and Karen for a sec. So Eddie and Karen, both of you, I think, would live in what's called supportive housing, right? Because I know, Eddie, you've had a struggle with addiction, and I know Karen as well. Both of you have that as part of your life and your history. Do you have a thought on this in terms of if we're going to try, if Stephanie's going to try to make things better coming out, Eddie, would you put a priority on the other supports so it's not just the roof over your head?
Well, the other factors are once you put, a person in, house them, what are they going to do after that?
Right.
Is there going to be some type of program where, you can get skilled labor, get them off maybe the system? So I think that's another priority we have to look at.
Yeah. Karen, what about you? Do you have a view on that, about what other support you need, not just the roof over your head, but have you found that you already described that you're sort of providing support to your neighbors already by having them come and visit you?
Yeah, I usually let them come and visit me, like not doing anything what they're doing.
Right.
I should try to stay them up and tell them I can't do that at home because I don't do dope. I drink once in a while nowadays. I used to be a heavy drinker,
Right.
and I'm throwing weight down. I'm trying to teach them how to do that, trying to keep them away from it, but they don't. I don't know. They don't. It doesn't help them. To rather just go their way without needing help. I think they want to do it their way. One of them told me that if she gets a house, I can't mention her name, a place, and she's been on the street for a while. Sometimes I see her carry a blanket around because she doesn't have a tent or a camp to go to.
Right.
She says she do get a place, like a little apartment, even a bachelor apartment. She says she'll try and smarten up, like probably go to detox and stuff like that. She was telling me that.
Mm-hmm.
And once in a blue moon, I still see her on the street and she still talks to me about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I told her to come to my place one night. She couldn't do it. She's just going to go to, Centennial Square and do her own thing.
Right. So the support system has to somehow respect people's choice. They're going to live their life, but you want to find a way to at least give them some options. Tim, let's go to you. You've spent a career trying to build these systems so that there are options to support people like Karen's friend who needs more than just a roof. Can you talk to us about what you're observing across the country?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important for us to understand, and before I get started, I just want to say, acknowledge that I'm a guest here on the Okanagan territory and unceded territory of Okanagan people. So pleased to be speaking to you from Kelowna. I think it's important for us to remember that homelessness is a product of policy choices, right? And that's fundamentally what it is. And what Eddie and Karen have experienced is the result of choices that have been made, in the last 30 years and the product of colonization, right? And if we are going to address some of these things, then we need to be direct in dealing with the policy choices that created homelessness in the first place. And the right to housing is central to solving this crisis, because it's fundamentally about transferring power. It's about giving power back and control over their lives back to Eddie and Karen and folks like them, so that those policy choices that create homelessness can't be done or can be undone. And the right to housing also ensures that folks like Eddie and Karen are the experts, right, and are the center of fixing these policies. And when you talk about child intervention, when you talk about welfare reform, you talk about things like that, if you build those systems or rebuild the systems or fix the policy, working backward from the people that are in those systems and are subject to those systems, but give them some power, then you get much better policy. You get social policy and child intervention policy and housing policy that is effective and works. I often use the example, of the market, right, in the private market. So you
you need to speak up. I think you're using your inside voice because I know you're staying at your parents, and so you're trying.
I'm too quiet.
You told me that, so I need you to be a lot louder so that we all hear you. So keep going.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just saying that I think it's really important that when we're designing these systems, we put the people in the systems in the driver's seat of the redesign, right? Because if you think about the private market, right, the thing that makes the market work is that the customer has power,
right?
So that the system has to respond to the customer. The right to housing ensures that eventually the social policy, those systems have to respond to the customer. So it gives Eddie and Karen some power in that system. And that's the key to reversing some of these policies that create it. And the last point I'd make really quickly, and hopefully with enough volume, is that one of the things that COVID has shown us is that we can respond really quickly and really effectively, and we can move quickly, and that homelessness is solvable if we choose to do it. And the only way politicians, and you know this well, will choose to do it is if they're forced to do it.
Yes.
And if there's public pressure, right? And they know that not doing it will cause unelection, or doing it will cause election. So we have to be thinking about that as we think about undoing and ending homelessness.
Krista, I want to go to you because you chose to make a film about this, and I'm assuming part of the reason you chose to make the film was that you felt something needed to change. That there, and that can film be used to influence what Tim just suggested? Can political decisions be made, influenced by this kind of a film that you've made and the stories that you've told?
Well, I think it takes a lot of people, and it takes a lot of advocates like Tim and other organizations that push things, but I think it can be a piece of that, and it's an important piece of that. What I was feeling when I started making Us and Them was that there was a real disconnect between the average person, like the general population, and what was actually really happening on the ground in shelters and the reality of street life. So I was trying to bridge that, so to tell a story that could make people understand. And the one thing I found while making this film that it's not the reason why, but one of the common denominators we find amongst particularly the chronically homeless population is very severe childhood trauma and abuse. Mm-hmm. And I don't think people really get that. And it's really important that they do. And I think I always quote Dr. Gabor Mate because he said it best: they're abused children that get abused all over again by society. Mm-hmm. Now, that's really what Us and Them shows, but I'm actually working on a follow-up film to it right now because I want to cover the things that Tim is talking about, which are the policy that's created this, the history of the homeless crisis, where this is coming from, and what we can do to solve it, and what we're seeing. Like, there's very bold solutions happening in other countries around the world that we can be looking to for guidance and to try to solve these things. But we need to get the general population on board because it is about elections and it's about votes. Mm-hmm. Politicians will do.
The one thing about your film, I would hope, and I hope many, many people will continue to watch it. We're seeing lots of people in the chat who are appreciating that they've had a chance to watch it. And I think we should all now send it to our friends and get them all to watch it. It builds a broader understanding and empathy for the stories of the people that experience homelessness. Stephanie, in terms of the way BC Housing has operated, has it had mechanisms so that Eddie and Karen and people like them that have lived experience can actually inform what you're doing? Because as Tim suggested, so often policymakers are guilty of this. We dream up fancy policies that actually don't work. What's BC Housing's experience been with that?
Yeah, we've been really moving in that direction, and I'm really pleased to say that we've heard that call very loud and clear from community. We started our relationship with the campers at Oppenheimer last August. We were invited to a meeting. I attended with my colleagues. We listened to the ways that our processes were not working. We listened to the ways that certain things in our policy structures were not working, and it was not a comfortable conversation, but it was a real one. And I think systems and institutions and those of us who represent them have to build a little bit of a thicker skin to be able to hear those criticisms and to respond to them and be listening. Because, we talk about equity a lot, but what we don't talk about is how we're giving away power, how we're giving away authority. What will we do on one side of the equation is kind of our focus, but we have to look at those of us that hold wealth, power, and influence in society and think about how we're actually giving that away and relinquishing it, because it's this imbalance, I think, that really perpetuates some of the harm we see. And so that relationship that we started with our colleagues in the park board and other members of different institutions really was for months in progress. So we had established trust. We established a two-way conversation. We expressed our limitations. They expressed their needs. We kept working to kind of broaden out the boundaries of our box. And what we have now is a completely new way of dealing with people, so that when it came time for this public safety order to take people out of encampments during the pandemic and into hotels, we had that relationship. We actually saw the value of peers. So this was something that was asked repeatedly, and we engaged a peer network to actually work with the people who were in those situations. They delivered the daily communications that we would prepare to say, this is what's happening today. People are being offered homes. People are being offered opportunities. What do you need for storage? Do you have pets? Do you have a significant other? All of that kind of outreach went along with our peer network. And the peer network were an Indigenous group of people who had experience of being homeless. And so they were empowered in that position to help with that communication and to share what was going on. It was very valuable. And we've learned now that we shouldn't be doing this work any longer without peers being embedded with people, who have the lived experience, who are saying, this is what these systems have done and how they have not worked, and really bringing their ideas to the fore, especially when that trust may not have been established yet, like we had the opportunity to respond to. So it is critical, I think, moving forward, that lived experience and communities at the table, it has to be that way. And in my other hat, at Hogan's Alley Society, that's something we constantly argue for, is that people of African descent in Canada no longer want policies imposed on our communities. We don't want programs imposed on us. We want to be the drivers. We know, where the shoe pinches, let us create the pair of shoes that we are deciding to walk in. And this is the call we hear from communities all the time. But what you see, I think, is the resistance. Systems don't want to share that. We know what's best. We want to kind of come in and give our solutions, and we really have to decolonize that process.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, can I just jump in and just really echo what Stephanie's saying? That is really, like, that negotiation that she described is exactly, that's how the right to housing can manifest at a community level. So we've legislated the right to housing. Now we need to implement the right to housing, and at the, at a local level and an institutional level, what Stephanie's describing is exactly that kind of process that we need to ensure happens in all of these kinds of situations, that negotiated conversation and relationship with the people that are in the system.
Tim, do you see a difference in the conversation now? You said, and I hear it in other city talks, we do all sorts of topics on this show, as you know, and do you see a difference now in terms of a willingness on the part of political decision makers? They're obviously moving much more quickly. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's going to be a greater willingness to actually take bold steps to solve this through the right to housing, for instance?
Well, what's that great quote? Never letting a good crisis go to waste. I think, in a crisis like this, that we're seeing with the pandemic, there is an opportunity. I think there's a window of opportunity where I think the public is feeling some of the same pressures now that people experiencing homelessness may feel some of the same fears, some of the same worries, appreciating that their healthcare is tied to their home. I think that the pandemic has opened a door now where a policy idea, a bold idea like ending homelessness, like making significant investments in housing and the right to housing, in January or December might have been looked on as a bit crazy, are now well within the realm of what's possible. And I think it's time for us to redefine and be very clear and loud about what's possible. And we've proven through COVID that we can move rapidly and support people quickly and get them into a better living situation rapidly across the country. Then that we should be doing that now. Like I just think there's a new we've proven we can do it. I think the public is coming alongside. We just need to now push through this window of opportunity and make sure that ending homelessness is on the minds and lips of every federal and provincial politician.
Yeah. I want to go back to Eddie and Karen for a sec. In terms of, do you feel hopeful through this pandemic? Do you think there's the potential that more people will listen to the experience of people living on the street and homeless? Karen, what do you think? Do you feel think people are going to be more interested and more hopeful?
I just don't really know how they feel. But I've been just sitting here thinking, like, if some of them could just get indoors right now or whenever before winter, I'm pretty sure they'll be really happy.
Mm-hmm.
They'll probably think of what they're going to do, like find a job or like go back to school or something like that. Instead of being outside, they probably do have families too, like kids and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. It's kind of hard to say about those people out there. It's hard to talk to them too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't get any words out of them. I try to talk to them, but it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
They won't listen to me. Some of them tries, but it's no use.
Mm-hmm.
So the best thing to do is I just hope, I pray to God that they're indoors before winter in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure they'll do something with their life then.
Just
I
gets
can't
them.
I can't tell them what to do.
No, but it gets them some support, some structure.
Yeah.
Housing is critical.
Right. Right. Eddie?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And also getting the family unit in on it, like we all have families, and most homeless people have made mistakes somewhere along the line, is trying to get your families back united and on board with you, and
Mm-hmm.
talk to them and try to unite. Families can help, the government, but it all comes down to yourself, which direction, which path you're going to take.
Mm-hmm.
So,
CUI, we always say we're in the connective tissue business. We're trying to connect people in Victoria with people in Edmonton, with people in Montreal, with people in Halifax, who are all challenged by the same kinds of things in their cities. Maybe it's homelessness, maybe it's flooding, maybe it's economic development, all sorts of things. We're in that connective tissue business. But as you suggest, Karen and Eddie both echo, and actually each of the panelists has spoken to this, it's really about us feeling connected to one another. And do we have the mechanisms to support one another as we make our lives work? And whether or not whether COVID sort of threw us all into not the same challenge. People have said, well, we're all in the same boat, but no, we're all in the same storm, but with different boats. Some people don't even have a boat. Is this connection? What'd you say, Krista?
There needs to be enough boats.
There needs to be enough boats.
Enough affordable and appropriate boats.
And people who know how to steer the boats and
So, Mary, sorry, Mary, I don't mean to drop it. I think this is a really important point, and this is a challenge to the guests on the webinar. Homelessness is the policy equivalent of a high school dance, right? Everybody's standing along the wall looking at the feet, wondering who's going to make the first move. And this is why people like Mayor Helps are so important, because it takes often municipal leaders to say enough is enough and to drag the feds and the province onto the dance floor to do something about it, right? Yeah. I mean, I think that we can't leave this up to to Eddie and Karen. It's not their problem to fix. This is our problem to fix, and somebody's got to go first. And that's the important piece of this is the people on this call. I know it. I know some of the names. I'm watching through the attendees, and I know some of the people on this call are in a position where they have power they can share, right? Like what Stephanie says, it's sharing your power and using that privilege and influence to make sure that Eddie and Karen and folks like them have voice, right? And are involved in the process. But it really takes it, that if you look at any city, anywhere in the world, I guarantee you where there are those cities making progress in reducing homelessness, you have strong local leaders. I guarantee you that is the secret sauce of ending homelessness, right? And it's in where those local leaders like Mayor House are able to drag the other governments onto the dance floor and get them to put their money in, get them to put the resources in, get them to make sure that Eddie and Karen are included in the conversation and are the drivers of their own lives. Then you get results.
But people like us, regular people, have to somehow support those local leaders to take that leadership. And we're getting lots of comments in the chat about neighborhoods that try to stop affordable housing. And we know that there is tension in neighborhoods now. And I know that Victoria is experiencing this directly. And there's concern about whether we can peacefully actually create the changes we need. Stephanie, what's your thinking on that around power and giving up power, as Tim suggested?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite obsessions, right? As a person of African descent and a woman, and growing up low income, like this is the challenge of our era, is looking at the fact that we've established our societies in such a way that holds power, wealth, and control in very few hands. Those hands are pretty similar. And we've excluded other people with violent means when you think of it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk enough in Canada about the school to prison pipeline, about how marginalized children, low income children are pushed out of school for behaviors that, are not violent and then end up as high school dropouts, and what that means for their lives, right? We don't talk enough about the fact that because our education system does not support all types of students of all backgrounds, that's why kids feel isolated and alienated in school, and that there's no place for low-income kids to, have sports necessarily anymore, and all those things that maybe the government used to pay for. Like, we are got to interrogate those things as well when we talk about homelessness. We have to talk about white supremacy in Canada. We have to talk about, mass incarceration. We have to talk about the disempowering of women and women's voices in their communities and in, spaces of violence. Like, we have to really expand what, we sometimes focus in so far on a problem or an issue without opening up and looking at all of its roots. There are a lot of really terrible roots in Canada to homelessness. And unfortunately, we're not really driving home solutions in those areas. So, when I think about, when we did this work locally, having the 3 First Nations on site in the decampment process every day to offer a territorial welcome, to offer words of wisdom and healing, and what that meant to a significant number of the people that on that site who were Indigenous, or other people who are looking for cultural connection and feel isolated. So, I mean, I think as we think about all of this, we've got to really start getting into some of those uncomfortable areas that we skirt around and think, if we can just do this one thing without thinking that all of these other things are the drivers.
But somehow there's it seems to be a both and, Stephanie, because on the one hand, you're saying we've got to dismantle white supremacy and big historic systemic patterns. But at the same time, you're saying you can actually do something at a local level in an innovative way and create a model that shows people this can be done. So you just described the one that you've described. And on the chat, we have a woman named Pam. I don't know her, Pam. Hi, Pam, whoever you are, but she's talking about a very local project where she is actually leading something, it sounds to me from reading the chat, where they're actually creating units and just kind of getting on with it. And I think maybe we need to do both, do we? The right to housing, obviously, is advocacy at the national and international level. We're going to hear more about this week. But at the local level, you're giving us examples of really good pilots that have worked. And I wonder if Eddie and Karen's story through Krista's movie isn't also a story that it showed something that actually worked, a pilot that works, eh? So we have to do both, huh?
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. This is a complex web of a problem, and the solutions have to be smarter than that complex web, and really get at all of it, because we don't have the time anymore to isolate or one at a time. We have to do it all at once. And a lot of people on this panel and in the audience as attendees have some part of the toolbox in their hand, and others have another tool. And I think it's about bringing those tools together. We have to acknowledge what protest does as well. I mean, I heard the mayor of Vancouver say once, if you're not getting through with our system, then, you know, take to the media or take to the streets. I mean, that's a I don't know if he meant it the way that sometimes it shows up, but that's really important. We actually do have to sometimes take to the streets. We do have to take to the media. We do have to put that kind of political pressure and talk to our neighbor next door and say, you know what, there's a project coming into this community and I'm for it. And here's why. Here's why we got to really support people getting housing in our neighborhood, and why that really matters. Even though I have heard language that is, you know, to describe homeless people or people that have been unsheltered and abandoned by the system, that is reminiscent of the worst Jim Crow, alienating, stereotype, racist, you know, horrible language. But for some reason, it gets a bit more of a pass when we're talking about homelessness. And that is got to be something we don't even tolerate.
Yeah, we don't do. Thanks for everybody who's participating on the chat and posting in examples of successes. I think this is part of what the Shifts project, which they're partnering with us here at the COI. We're very, very happy to be providing a Canadian home to the Shift as they work internationally, but for the Canadian piece. And they are needing to collect these success stories. So I think more and more, if you want to post them on the chat, if you know of projects that have gone forward that are really good pilots that could be examples, that's terrific. We'd love to see them. And of course, you can always contact us. You can always contact the Shift online or COI online, and we'll pick them up there too. Tim, we've only got a few minutes left. And so I want to just go to you in terms of riffing on part of what Stephanie was talking about. This idea that we have to actually, we've got, you know, there's this phrase Overton window that people start talking about, that, you know, basically when everything blows up, there's an opportunity to come in and make some systemic change. What do you see as the priority from your point of view, from the Alliance to End Homelessness? Have you focused enough on that? Are you mobilizing people around one or two key things?
Yeah, well, we've launched a national campaign called Recovery for All. I think for us right now, we're focused first. We're seeing an opportunity with the government of Canada to make sure that we have, and remember, that's where homelessness really started with federal policy changes in the mid '90s. If you know, layered on top of colonization, you know, we're focused on building on the national housing strategy, make sure that there's enough housing and resources available to end homelessness out of the federal government. And what's interesting, to building on Stephanie's point, that I think if we force ourselves into this Overton window, and there is we need to build this movement, right? Like the process of ending homelessness is going to be like relentless incrementalism, dealing with all of those issues that Stephanie pointed out. And we can't be paralyzed by the scale of this thing. But if we move quickly and organize our movement, and I think we can get big change out of government. Like in the last month, we launched Recovery for All with our 6-point plan and a call for investment from the federal government that would save $18 billion, create 500,000 jobs, and create a $52 billion national housing strategy that could effectively end homelessness in Canada. And you know, in less than a month and a half, we've had 15,000 people sign up and over 100,000 letters sent to the federal government.
Wow.
Right?
Great.
I am absolutely convinced that if we, you know, if the million Canadians who have experienced homelessness in their lives, the 235,000 people who experience homelessness every year, all of the people that are working in the system, all of the people that are on this call, if we engage in the process as a movement, we can own the space, right? We can begin to not dominate, but create that space where governments of all stripes feel that they must have housing policy that ends homelessness, that must deal with the issues that Stephanie so aptly outlined. But we got to get started, right? And you know, as you say, the Overton window's there. Let's, you know, we have a window of opportunity right now, and we ought to take it.
I saw you change your word from dominate this space. That was very That was very feminist of you to change that. But I hear the spirit of it is that let's own this space. Let's lead this space. Is that possible?
Well, yeah, and I think, we talk about, the NIMBY and the people that are having trouble with the encampments and things like that. But, we're challenging a really entrenched status quo. You look at how Black Lives Matter has taken, has raised an issue. It's uncomfortable, right? It's challenging. It's painful. There's conflict, but that's necessary conflict.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to have these uncomfortable conversations with people who, don't like that there's homelessness in the park. We have to deal with it. We just have to be brave and step into those spaces.
Yeah.
Okay, well, for the last few minutes we've got, I want to go to our brave team over here in Victoria who put this film together and shared their stories. And so as we go forward, Eddie and Karen, and you think about what the next several months are going to look like, do you have something in your mind that what's going to be your priority over the next several months as you continue to live with COVID and you watch what's going on around you with your neighbors and things? Karen, have you got something you want to say first, and then Eddie can say something?
No, I'll pass.
You'll pass. Eddie, what about you?
I'm trying to get attached with family members, and like my family means a lot. I've got kids, grandkids, and I'm trying to open up a pathway, to see them, and maybe they can learn by my mistakes in life.
You're creating new connective tissue between you and your kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not so much your mistakes as the mistakes of the society that's created this situation, right?
Yeah.
We use that phrase, it takes a village to raise kids. And if the village isn't functioning, it's really hard to do it, right? I guess we're all trying to build a better village in our urban.
Yeah.
We've excluded homeless people from our society, right? And they've created their own society for themselves. And some of the things that happen in that society are difficult for the bigger dominant society to look at, but it's survival. They've had to create their own economies, and because the welfare rates, the social assistance rates, the shelter allowance, $375 here. Like, when's the last time you could rent an apartment in Victoria for $375?
Yeah.
Like, it's so absurd. So people are forced into drug dealing, prostitution, petty crime, all these things that the community resistors or the NIMBYs are complaining about, but we've created this. And we have to move out of it, like Tim's saying, right? We need to step in and have those uncomfortable conversations. I want to go into the hotels in Victoria and screen us and them and bring both parties together and just see what happens. It could be an explosion, but we've got to do it, right?
Stephanie's got a model for you.
Okay.
She's been trying to engage, as she's just been describing. I just want to thank everybody here for participating so candidly in this session and sharing with us their experience and their expertise and their aspirations about what we need to have happen. In terms of difficult conversations, there are several that take place in us and them. Krista, you made this film over, I guess, 15 years, eh?
10, but I guess now that I'm doing more, I just can't stop.
10 years. But I think this is part of what we need to understand, is that this is a process. And as Stephanie suggested, in terms of dismantling colonialism, this is a process we're engaged in. We have to be committed to it. Tim, we appreciate all your comments and your advocacy across the country. So really, could I just, on behalf of the audience, thank all 5 of you, Karen and Eddie and Krista and Stephanie and Tim, for sharing with us your experience and your perspective on how do we really address homelessness and the crisis it is, and how do we find sustainable solutions. And it's lovely to have Eddie and Karen's story there as an example of how there are different paths and different ways to emerge from this. And we are carrying on with Right to Home for the rest of the week. We have another session tomorrow, which is on imagining different futures, which is, I think, what Karen and Eddie's experience speak to, and what Stephanie and Tim are calling for is different futures. How can we reimagine housing in a post-pandemic world? And we have 5 fabulous people coming from across the country with experience in Canada and overseas about that, and particularly about the right to housing, and whether that is the instrument to get us nationally to where we need to be in this conversation. So thanks to all our sponsors, of which there are many, and I will acknowledge them as we go through this week, but I want to just acknowledge them now, if I may, if I can find the list quickly. You know what, I can't. So they just have to know. Yes, I can. I pulled it out. They are the SHIFT, the Aboriginal Housing and Mortgage Association, the Architecture and Design Film Festival, the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, Big Will Community Foundation and Big Will Burger, Canada Mortgage and Housing, they'll be on with us tomorrow, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, that's Tim, who you've been listening to, the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, the Center for Equality, Rights and Accommodation, the City of Victoria, under the leadership of Mayor Helps, the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada, Maytree, and the Urban Development Institute in Victoria. Thanks for joining us for this second session. Important conversation. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye-bye.